Howdy folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and today for you, I have an Armored Warfare replay. We're going to dive on into it. This is PV Hardcore Operation Meltdown. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a moment here, show the model of the tank off. This is the XM1. This is the General Motors version of the XM1, by the way. There's actually two different variants of the XM1. I'm going to dive into it here in a little bit as I'm dispensing my notes that I found in research, give you a little bit of history and development. Now, there is a video where I do go over the statistics, the armor pattern, and stuff like that of the XM1 Abrams here. And what I will do is I will show, I'll post a link in the video description so you can see that video. This is just going to be a gameplay and history and development video covering the XM1. Now, one thing I do want to point out in game is it does sound like it has a turbine engine. That is incorrect. The General Motors variant of the XM1 Abrams did not have a turbine engine. Instead, it had a high-performance diesel engine. But there was an offer to put a turbine into it. I'll dive on into that here in a little bit. Another feature I want to point out about the General Motors variant of the XM1 Abrams versus the Chrysler model, and how you'll definitely be able to give it away, is the Chrysler variant actually has the vision block on the turret roof, where here it's off to the side of the turret. I'll let the introduction roll here a little bit, and then once it rolls out, I will actually begin talking more about the Abrams tank and its history and development. After the failed ordeal with the MBT-70 program, the U.S. military decided to change its approach for the next generation main battle tank. Instead of having a tank crammed with the latest tech, the focus would be having a vehicle that was affordable but good enough for battlefield supremacy. So a series of requirements would be placed, and two contracts would be ordered for the M1 program. One contract would go to Chrysler Defense Division, and the other going to General Motors for prototypes. Now, since I want to be talking a bit here about the Chrysler version, this is actually a photograph of the Chrysler prototype, and actually you'd see many of the features in the Chrysler prototype ended up in the production version of the M1 Abrams, which Chrysler would win the contract at the end of the day, so that only makes sense. But there was also changes made for production reasons, different requirements that changed, etc. Both prototypes were delivered in 1976, and they would begin trials at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. A Leopard 2K prototype was also added to the trials for comparison. At the time, we had no interest, actually, believe it or not, in using any kind of foreign tech on the M1 Abrams program, and essentially we were not interested in buying Leopard tanks. Both vehicles were armed with a M68E1 rifled gun. It was 105 millimeter. That being said, though, the 120 millimeter gun was preferred, but at the time, the ammunition and components was still in development phase and needed more time. So we were already, at this point, we were already dead set on we're going to have a 120 millimeter gun. It's what Germany had gone to. The British have been using a 120 millimeter rifled gun for years. The only thing was we wanted our own ammunition, even though it was still heavily influenced by what the Germans was making. And essentially, while we adopted the Rheinmetall L44 120 millimeter main gun, we still want to be able to produce the guns ourselves, have our own parts to it. There were some design features that we made ourselves, such as there was a different recoiling system, as well as there was changes made in the breech block itself. Also, I believe the thermal sleeve is different. So essentially, we pretty much took their design, and the only thing we took from their design was the gun barrel itself. Everything else is American American built, American made, and well, even the barrel is American built, even though it's a German design. During the trials, both tanks seems to have noted engine problems. The AGT 1500 proved to enjoy chugging fuel with a fuel economy of 3.8 gallons per mile. Now, folks, I know that sounds pretty bad, but let me tell you what. I was on an XM1 Abrams crew, and the fuel economy has not improved over the years. Actually, in fact, it's gotten worse. The GM version used a variable compression diesel engine, but was noted to be unreliable. Now, that's an interesting point there, because there was notations from the testers and the people in charge of the testing that there was concerns that the turbine engine would be unreliable. Now, nothing had proved to them during the trials that the turbine engine was actually unreliable. There was some reliability issues with dirt clogging the air intake. That wasn't a huge deal because they actually were able to adjust that during the trials, which that would actually later become a problem during Operation Desert Storm. Not going to get into that too much. Just wanted to bring that up, that it's interesting that the GM version diesel engine was proving to be unreliable, but there was concerns from the testers that the turbine engine would be unreliable. It was just a very interesting standpoint. That being said, the GM version offered better protection, better stabilization, and a lower cost per unit. At the time, we're looking at $208 million for the GM version versus $221 million for the Chrysler version. In 1977, Lieutenant Colonel Mormon, it just, looking at it, just doesn't seem right, prepared a stack of letters to inform Congress of the decision to greenlight the GM version. All that was required was for Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld to sign off on the project. However, things would be held by reasons I cannot confirm at this time. There was multiple things, and honestly, it looked like there might have been quite a bit of lobbying involved to get the Chrysler version of the M1 Abrams to pass. The thing is I cannot confirm exactly what prevented the GM version from being adopted versus the Chrysler version, or what held up the confirmation. However, I can confirm that there was some additional testing done. All that being said, the Chrysler version would be selected with some design changes. Basically, you saw the photo earlier here. I'll show it again, and you can see that. Just look at a M1 Abrams from now, and you can see there's quite a bit of difference. So all that being said, the Chrysler version would be selected, and the first production XM1 would roll off the assembly line in 1980. Now, the very early XM1 tanks that rolled off the production line, these are production M1 Abrams, folks, were actually labeled as XM1 by their identification plates, because at the time it was unknown if they were going to use the M1 designation. That being said, they still did. It was armed with a 105 millimeter M68A1 rifled gun, and while initial production rates would be low, Chrysler would build over 1,000 M1s by 1982. Later, General Dynamics Land Systems would purchase Chrysler Defense in 1982. The M1 Abrams has had a series of upgrades over the years and is still considered one of the top main battle tanks in the world today. So the tank has actually proven itself time and time again. It would prove itself in Desert Storm. And there was actually a lot of worries about how it would perform in Desert Storm. And actually, it considered to perform very well. Now, that being said, there is one other notation here I want to make, especially with the 105mm gun. When I was looking at information for it, there were some changes made to the recoiling system, and there was changes made to the breech block and the barrel, so that way it could withstand a higher barrel pressure. The other thing I had found, and this I found interesting because this is actually the first use of depleted uranium ammunition I know of, but the M68E1 and the M68A1 both actually had a depleted uranium sabot penetrator. I did actually find that interesting. The M60 did not have depleted uranium, by the way, folks. Now, later versions might have, maybe after they introduced the ammunition, the M60A3s would, and A1s that we still had in service, would get that ammunition as well. But that new penetrator was designed at the same time that the Abrams was designed, and I think that's because we're going to be keeping the 105mm gun a little while longer, which also brings up some of the changes that were made. As you can see, there's quite a few changes in the turret itself, and I think that's got to do with the fact that when the changes were made around the fact that we were 100% sure at that time we were going to be putting a 120mm main gun into the Abrams tank, and they made changes to more or less be able to cram that gun into the tank when time had come. As well as, I'm sure there was also things done to make modifications to go from the 105 to the 120 fairly easy. Anyway, folks, that's actually going to wrap up the replay itself. Now, what I would do 18,324 damage, spot 9 enemy vehicles, and destroy 15, grabbing myself a blue star and a destroyer medal. Actually, pretty good match in the XM1 Abrams, considering it's got kind of a slow rate of fire. It's definitely slower than the M1 Abrams, almost by, I think it's by about 600 or 700 points on average. But I would be top damage overall, and I would also be #1 for spotting, using that thick boy armor to take hits and be able to spot enemy vehicles. Anyway, folks, that is my replay of the General Motors XM1 Abrams and my discussion about the XM1 Abrams. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video, even though I got tongue-tied a couple times. Anyway, folks, thank you very much for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching, and have yourself a wonderful day.